So as you can see from the title of the video, I want to talk a little bit today, about the witch's pyramid, which is a concept that I don't really see people talk about all that much on YouTube. And I haven't read any kind of new beginner books for a really long time, so I don't know if it's something that's even really a thing anymore. But I wanted to basically, I have a few videos in the pipeline where I basically want to talk about things that I learnt very, very early on in my practice that I still kind of incorporate into my belief system and my practice and how I do things, even though my practice itself has evolved so much over the last 20 or so years. And one of those things is the witch's pyramid. So this is, for those who don't know, this is the ideas of to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. And I'll go into that a little bit more. Just for a little bit of background, it originally comes from ceremonial magic. So it originally appears in this book. This was actually two books originally. Transcendental Magic by Eliphas Levi. This book came out in 1854 with part 1 and part 2 was 1855, I believe. I have it as one volume, in which has been translated by A.E. Waite. Haven't read it all, not gonna lie. He doesn't actually call it the witch's pyramid. He always referred to it as either the full power of the Magi or the full power of the Sphinx. And he writes, to attain the sanctum regnum, in other words, the knowledge and power of the Magi, there are 4 indispensable conditions: an intelligence illuminated by study, an intrepidity which nothing can check, a will which cannot be broken, and a prudence which nothing can corrupt and nothing intoxicate. To know, to dare, to will, to keep silence. Such are the 4 words of the Magus inscribed upon the 4 symbolic forms of the Sphinx. These maxims can be combined after 4 manners and explained 4 times by one another. So, and that's it. I mean, that's all the mention there really is of it originally. It didn't really become known as the witch's pyramid until around about the 1950s, and it's only called that in witchcraft circles. It's not what it was originally known by. I actually, when I sat down to plan for this video and thought about, did a bit of research, and wanted to do a bit of research and thought about what I wanted to say, and then just decided to wing it, by the way, so there's that. I actually found that a lot of the books that I owned, and still own, but a lot of the books that I owned and read early on in my journey don't actually talk about it all that much either. The one place that it did come up was the Complete Idiot's Guide to Wicca and Witchcraft, which does dedicate a whole chapter to it. But otherwise it didn't really come up in any of the books. But it's something that I've always known and has always been part of my practice. I love this book, by the way. I think this is a fantastic book. I do enjoy the Complete Idiot Guides books. I also enjoy the Dummies books, that they're like Wicca and Witchcraft for Dummies, that kind of thing. But this book did come out in 2000, so it is like 20 years old. So that's something to bear in mind. Things do move on, things do change, our understanding of things do change. So I'm not saying I would necessarily recommend this to someone starting out now, but I do think it's a good book. Yeah, so it didn't come up in an awful lot of the books that I own, but I do remember it being something that I read quite a lot about, and that I spoke to people about in forums and people in real life and, in Yahoo groups and that kind of thing. So it was a concept that I was very strongly aware of. And just to go through it very, very quickly, so it's basically 4 pillars that build up a pyramid. I mean, either you've got the foundation and you've got the 3 sides, or you could say it builds up the pyramid like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, whatever, however you want to picture it. But each one builds upon the other, and it's something that either we can consider when doing magic in general and spell work, which is pretty much how I'm going to talk about it probably now, but it's also something that I think that you can use when thinking about your entire practice and how you want to live in the world as a witch. All four are linked to the elements. So we start with to know, which is linked to the element of air. And this is about really like understanding not just what you want and why you want it, but also what you need in order to create a spell and why you would need it. I think it's really important to understand our motivations and our intentions. Intention is a hugely important part of spellcasting, not the only part, but an important part of spellcasting. And that to know is about really digging in and understanding the intentions behind why we're going to do the spell, what we want the spell to achieve, what we're going to do on a mundane level to help bring the spell about. But I think it's also about understanding if you're going to use magical tools, why do you use those tools? If you're going to use particular herbs, why are you using those herbs? If you're going to use particular words, or you're going to use particular gestures, or you're going to include particular things that you've read from somewhere else, like phases of the moon and all that kind of stuff. It's all about really having the knowledge to understand why you're using those things, why you're doing those things, why you're incorporating those things into your spell. So next up we have to dare, and this is linked to the element of water. And this is about having the courage and the emotional fortitude to kind of take the next step. It's about being brave enough to actually make the changes that you want to see in the world, because magic ultimately, spellcraft ultimately, is about creating change, and sometimes change can be scary. Even change for the better can be scary, and the idea that we can bring these things that we most desire into our lives, that we have the power to affect the world around us and the world that we live in, can be pretty scary. Actually doing magic, actually doing the thing can be intimidating. It can be a lot easier to just lament the lack of love or the lack of protection or the lack of abundance in our lives, and it's easier to do that than it is to do the work to actually bring those things into our lives. So you kind of have to be brave enough to take the steps necessary in order to do it. Then we have to will, which is linked to fire. This is the spell work itself. So willpower, it's the building up of energy and putting it out into the universe in order to tell the universe, this is the thing that I want, and this is the energy that I'm willing to put into the thing that I wish to manifest. And that's why it's not enough a spell is never enough to just stand in front of an altar or whatever and read the words and then light the candle and do this hand gesture and burn this bit of paper. It's got to have the fire, it's got to have the passion, it's got to have the drive, it's got to have the energy behind it that builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up, so that you can then send it out into the world to do the thing that you want to do. And then finally we have to keep silent, which is linked to the element of earth. And this particular part of the pyramid is something that's been on my mind, which kind of led me to make this video in the first place. So I've been thinking about how I want to incorporate more witchcrafty stuff into my channel, and I've been thinking about how I want to incorporate more witchcrafty stuff into my Instagram, and just in general how I want more of my magic and my witchcraft and my paganism and my spirituality to be threaded into my social media stuff. And I've been thinking about this, and I've been looking at what other people are doing and stuff, and one of the things that I see that I know I will never do, and that I struggle with, but I don't judge other people for how they choose to do things, but that just doesn't sit within my belief system, is videos of people doing spell work, or Instagram posts of people's actual spell work whilst it's being done, or people talking in detail about the spell that they've literally just cast. And those are the kind of things that I'll never do, because I strongly believe in the tenet to keep silent for a couple of reasons. So firstly, I think that a huge part of spell work is about letting go. You can't, so I don't know if I'm going to explain this very well, so bear with me while I ramble my way through it. I think you have to do the main mundane stuff as well, and that has to count. But I think once you've sent your desire out into the universe, however that looks to you, whatever that might mean, and you have sent your energy out to it, I think an important part is to then let go of it. Let it go and let it be. You have to let go of your attachment to that spell and your attachment to that outcome. And I think that by talking about it, or by sharing it in some way, you're continuing to have that kind of link between you and it. So that attachment is kind of still there. It's still in the forefront of your mind, but you're still actually giving energy to it in a way that still attaches you to it by physically giving energy to it by talking about it with other people. So there is a bit of that involved. I think that once it's gone, you need to let it go and you need to let it do its thing, which is why it's so important to write it down at the time, so that you don't have to try and remember it later, because you need to let it go. And then when it does come to pass, you can then go back and make notes about it and stuff. And also when it does come to pass, you can then talk about it with people and you can share it and stuff. So there is kind of that. I don't think that it's necessarily, I think energetically, I don't think it's necessarily good to continue to give voice to it and to give energy to it while you're waiting for it to come to pass. And then the other thing I think is that I don't believe that somebody else necessarily has the power to negatively impact our spells, but I do believe that we have the power to negatively impact our spells, and I do believe that other people have the power to negatively influence and impact us. I think a lot of spell work is about confidence and about belief, and when you tell somebody about your spells, or you put them out there in social media, which makes it even more likely, and you maybe get responses, like you might get some really negative responses, like you might get people telling you that you're crazy and you're stupid and you must be an idiot if you believe in magic and all that kind of stuff, and they're actually in some respects easier to ignore. But you might get, you might tell somebody, or you might put a spell out there and somebody might watch it, and then you might start getting these comments of like, really? You went with that herb? Or you said those things? Or, oh, I don't know if your intention was as specific as you meant it to be, or you did it on that day. Like, really? And I think that when we don't necessarily get the reaction that we're hoping for, when we get a negative reaction from somebody, or somebody else puts that moment of doubt out there into the world, I think that can impact us, and the impact that it has on us can then have an impact on our spell. So I will only ever talk about magic hypothetically. I would be quite happy to have a conversation about, if I was going to do a spell for protection, these are the types of things that I would do in order to do that. This is something that I might consider. This is a spell I might consider doing. And I'm quite happy to talk about magic that I've done in the past. So, I wanted to do a spell to bring more love into my life, and this is how I did it, and this is the steps that I took, and this was the overall outcome. But while the spell is out there in the world, while it's doing its thing, and the universe or spirits or deities or whatever it is that's responsible for doing the thing is doing the thing, I prefer not to talk about it and not to kind of add any extra energetic link or energetic negativity to it. Now, I am aware, as I'm talking about this, that the flip side could be true too. So you could have very positive reactions, and that could, in theory, lend much more positive energy to your spell work. And I do think that that is possible. But for me, A, I wouldn't want to run the risk of that. And B, I do think an important part of spell work is about sending it out into the world and then letting it go. And continuously talking about it and thinking about it is not letting it go. So those are kind of my views, very, very rambly views on the Witch's Pyramid. The To Be Silent is the one that I kind of get the most in my head about, as you can probably tell. I'd love to hear your thoughts, if it's even something that you think about in your practice, or if it's even something that you have ever included, or if you think it's just rubbish, whatever. I'd just love to hear your thoughts on it, so let me know in the comments below, and I will see you all very, very shortly for another one. Take care everyone, and lots of love. Bye bye.